The transport shuttle hummed to a stop inside the massive cargo bay of the Stellar Wanderer. Jake Martinez took a deep breath and checked his diplomatic papers one last time. His hands were steady, but his heart beat a little faster than usual. This was his first time aboard an alien vessel, and everything felt enormous around him. The shuttle door opened with a soft hiss. Jake stepped out onto the metal floor and looked up, way up. The cargo bay stretched out like a football stadium, with ceiling lights that seemed as far away as stars. Dozens of alien beings moved around the space, some loading cargo, others just talking in groups. Jake had studied pictures of different alien species back on Earth, but seeing them in person was completely different. A group of Krillian warriors stood near a stack of metal boxes. Each one was at least 9 feet tall, with thick scales covering their bodies like natural armor. Their yellow eyes tracked Jake as he walked past, and he heard them making sounds. That might have been laughter. To his left, several Vextai traders examined some kind of glowing crystal. The Vextai looked like walking tanks, with metal plates built into their skin, and 4 arms that could each lift more than Jake weighed. One of them noticed him and nudged another with an elbow. They both stared at Jake like he was some kind of interesting bug. Near the far wall, 3 Zephyrians floated a few inches off the ground. Their crystal-like bodies caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. Jake had read that they were one of the smartest species in the galaxy, but right now they seemed more interested in pointing at him and making high-pitched sounds. Jake straightened his uniform jacket and walked toward the center of the bay, where a large Krillian was waiting. This had to be Captain Vorthik. The alien was even bigger than the others, with darker scales and gold markings on his arms that showed his rank. Behind him stood several other crew members from different species, all watching Jake approach. "Captain Vorthik," Jake said, stopping a few feet away and giving a small bow. "I am Jake Martinez, representative from Earth's Galactic Relations Council. Thank you for allowing me passage to Nexus Prime." Captain Vorthik looked down at Jake for a long moment. His yellow eyes moved from Jake's head to his feet and back again. Then the captain's mouth opened, showing rows of sharp teeth, and he made a sound that was definitely laughter. "This is Earth's representative?" Vorthik said to the others behind him. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "Are you sure this is not a child they sent by mistake?" The other aliens joined in the laughter. Jake felt his face get warm, but he kept his expression calm. He had expected this kind of reaction. The briefing files back on Earth had warned him that most alien species were much larger than humans. "I assure you, Captain, I am fully authorized to speak for Earth in all matters related to the upcoming trade summit," Jake said. He pulled out his credentials and held them up. "These documents have been verified by the Galactic Council." A new voice joined the conversation. "Let me see those papers, Tiny One." The speaker was a Naga, her snake-like body coiled behind her humanoid torso. This had to be Commander Vesha, the ship's second in command. She slithered forward and took the papers from Jake's hands. Her eyes, which were bright green with vertical pupils, scanned the documents quickly. "The papers appear to be real," she said, sounding disappointed. "Though I cannot believe Earth chose such a small creature to represent an entire world." "Perhaps humans are even weaker than we heard," said one of the Vextai traders. "If this is their best, their species must be very fragile indeed." More laughter echoed through the cargo bay. Jake noticed that work had stopped as more aliens gathered to see what was happening. Soon there were at least 30 different beings watching him, and most of them seemed to find something amusing about his presence. "I understand this might seem unusual," Jake said, keeping his voice level. "Humans are smaller than most galactic species, but we have other qualities that make us valuable partners in trade and diplomacy." "Such as?" Captain Vorthik asked, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "We are adaptable," Jake replied. "We learn quickly, and we work well with other species. We also have experience in solving complex problems through cooperation rather than force." This comment caused even more laughter. One of the Krillian warriors stepped forward. "Cooperation?" He said, "Little human in space, strength matters. Those who cannot fight cannot survive. What use is cooperation when pirates attack or when enemies threaten your ship?" Jake was about to answer when Captain Vorthik held up one clawed hand. "Enough questions for now. We must assign quarters and get underway." He looked down at Jake with what might have been pity. "You will be given quarters in Section 7, Level 12. It is appropriate for someone of your size." Commander Thesh's forked tongue flicked out in what Jake recognized as a naga. "Smile. Section 7 houses the maintenance drones and cleaning equipment. The rooms there are quite small, but they should fit you perfectly." The insults were not subtle, but Jake simply nodded. "Thank you for your hospitality, Captain." "When do we arrive at Nexus Prime?" "In 6 standard days," Vorthik replied. "Try not to get lost on the way to your quarters. The ship is very large, and humans are very small." More laughter followed this comment. Jake picked up his bag and started to walk toward the exit that would lead to Section 7. As he walked, he could hear the aliens behind him talking about him in voices they probably thought were too quiet for him to hear. Earth must be desperate if that is their best diplomat. I heard humans only live about 80 years. No wonder they are so weak. Do you think he even knows how to use weapons? He looks like he would run from any real fight. Jake kept walking, his face showing nothing. He had dealt with worse than this during his military service on Earth. Bullies were the same everywhere, whether they were human or alien. The trick was not to let them see that their words had any effect. The corridors of the Stellar Wanderer were built for beings much larger than humans. Jake had to stretch to reach some of the control panels, and the doorways were so tall, he felt like he was walking through a palace designed for giants. Other crew members passed him in the hallways, and most of them stared or made comments to their companions in languages Jake did not understand. Section 7 was exactly what he had expected. The quarters assigned to him were barely larger than a closet, with a bed that was too short and fixtures that were all positioned for someone half his height. It was clearly meant to be another insult, but Jake had slept in worse places during his time in the military. He unpacked his few belongings and sat on the edge of the small bed. The next 6 days were going to be difficult, but he had not come this far to give up now. Earth needed this trade agreement, and Jake was going to make sure his planet got the respect it deserved. As he settled in for his first night aboard the alien vessel, Jake thought about the briefing he had received before leaving Earth. His superiors had warned him that gaining acceptance in the galactic community would not be easy. Humans were newcomers, and most alien species had thousands of years of history among the stars. But Jake had something most diplomats did not have. Before joining the Galactic Relations Council, he had been a soldier. He knew what it meant to be underestimated, and he knew how to turn that weakness into strength. Tomorrow, he would begin the real work of proving that humanity belonged among the stars. Outside his small window, the stars streaked past as the Stellar Wanderer jumped to faster-than-light speed. Jake watched them for a while, thinking about home and the people counting on him to succeed. He would not let them down, no matter how many aliens laughed at the tiny human who dared to speak for an entire world. Jake woke up to the sound of alarms echoing through the ship. Red lights flashed in his tiny quarters, and he could feel the Stellar Wanderer shaking slightly. He quickly put on his uniform and stepped into the corridor where other crew members were running toward the main areas of the ship. A Vex-TIE engineer rushed past him, speaking rapidly into a communication device. Jake caught enough words to understand that the ship was having navigation problems. He followed the crowd toward the bridge, staying out of the way, but curious about what was happening. The main bridge was chaos. Captain Vorthik stood in the center, shouting orders to his crew. The large viewing screen showed space ahead of them, but it was not the normal black emptiness Jake expected. Instead, there were thousands of pieces of metal and rock floating in every direction. Some pieces were as small as cars, others were as big as buildings. "Report," Captain Vorthik demanded. Lieutenant Drex, one of the Krillian warriors from yesterday, stepped forward. "We have entered the graveyard field, Captain. Long-range sensors failed to detect it properly. There are the remains of hundreds of ships here, along with natural asteroids. The field stretches for millions of kilometers in all directions." Commander Vesha slithered up to the captain's side. "Navigation suggests we go around the field, but that would add 12 days to our journey. We would miss the trade summit entirely." Captain Vorthik's scaled face showed his anger. "And going through? Our computers cannot calculate a safe path." Drex replied, "The debris moves constantly, and our sensors cannot track all the objects at once. One mistake, and we could be destroyed." Jake stepped closer to get a better look at the viewing screen. The field really did look like a graveyard. Broken pieces of ships from many different species drifted among the asteroids. Some of the wrecks were ancient, their metal darkened by centuries in space. Others looked more recent, their hull plating still shining. "What if we use pattern recognition?" Jake said, not realizing he had spoken out loud. The bridge fell silent. Every alien on the command deck turned to stare at him. Captain Vorthik's yellow eyes narrowed. "What did you say, human?" Jake felt his face get warm, but he continued. "Pattern recognition, Captain. Human mathematicians developed techniques for finding safe paths through complex, moving fields. We used similar methods during asteroid mining operations in our solar system." Lieutenant Drex laughed harshly. "Human mining operations? Captain, their entire species has barely left their home system. What could they possibly know about navigating real space hazards?" "The principles are the same," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "Moving objects follow predictable patterns, even when they seem random. If you can identify the patterns, you can predict where safe spaces will open up." Commander Vesha's forked tongue flicked out dismissively. "Our computers are far more advanced than anything humans have created. If they cannot find a path, then no path exists." "Sometimes the problem is not the computer," Jake replied. "Sometimes the problem is how you ask the computer to solve it. Human approaches might be different enough to work where your methods fail." Captain Vorthik stared at Jake for a long moment. Around them, the ship continued to shake as small pieces of debris bounced off the hull. Finally, the captain spoke. "Your suggestion is noted, human. Now return to your quarters and let the real crew handle this problem." Jake nodded and stepped back, but he did not leave the bridge. Instead, he found a corner where he could watch the main screen and listen to the crew's attempts to solve the navigation problem. For the next 3 hours, he watched them try different approaches, all of which failed. The Krillian engineers tried to force their way through with brute strength, using the ship's powerful engines to push aside smaller debris. This only made things worse. As the pushed objects crashed into other debris and created new hazards, the Vextai specialists attempted to use their advanced sensors to map every object in the field simultaneously. Their computers overloaded trying to process so much information at once. The Zephyrian mathematicians tried to calculate the precise movements of every piece of debris. Their equations were beautiful, but took too long to solve, and by the time they had an answer, the field had already changed dot as Jake watched. He began to see patterns that the aliens were missing. The debris field was not truly random. The larger pieces created gravitational effects that influenced how the smaller pieces moved. There were currents in the field, like rivers in space, where objects moved in predictable ways. More importantly, Jake noticed that the aliens were trying to find a perfect solution. They wanted a path that was completely safe, with no risk at all. But Jake's military experience had taught him that sometimes you had to accept some risk to achieve your mission. Another alarm sounded. The ship's navigator, a tall Zephyrian with blue crystal skin, announced that they were running out of time. The field was slowly rotating, and if they waited much longer, even going around would not get them to the summit on time. Jake made a decision. He walked back to Captain Vorthik and cleared his throat. "Captain, I request permission to work with your navigation team." Vorthik looked down at him with obvious irritation. "Human, we have already told you that your primitive methods will not work here. With respect, Captain, your advanced methods are not working either. What do you have to lose by trying something different?" Lieutenant Drex stepped forward threateningly. "You dare suggest that human mathematics are superior to Krillian engineering?" "I suggest that different approaches might see different solutions," Jake replied calmly. "Sometimes an outside perspective can help." The bridge fell silent except for the sound of more debris hitting the hull. Captain Vorthik looked at the main screen, where his crew's latest attempt had just failed spectacularly. A large piece of wreckage had nearly collided with their ship. "Fine," the captain said finally. "You have 1 hour, human. But when you fail, you will return to your quarters and not speak again until we reach Nexus Prime." Jake nodded and moved to the navigation station. The Zephyrian navigator, whose name was Krista, looked at him with obvious doubt, but stepped aside to give him access to the computers. Jake studied the sensor data, looking for the patterns he had noticed from across the room. He asked Krista to adjust the sensors to focus on the largest debris pieces first, ignoring the smaller objects temporarily. This gave him a clearer picture of the major currents in the field. Next, he had the computer map, not where objects were, but where they were going to be. Instead of trying to avoid every piece of debris, he looked for spaces that would be empty when the ship arrived there. The other crew members gathered around the navigation station, watching Jake work. Most of them seemed to expect him to fail quickly, but a few looked curious about his different approach. After 30 minutes, Jake had identified what looked like a possible path. It was not perfect, and it would require precise timing, but it could work. The path would take them through the field in 8 hours, with acceptable risk levels. "This is your solution?" Lieutenant Drex asked, looking at Jake's calculations. "This path comes within 50 meters of several large debris pieces. That is far too dangerous." 50 meters is plenty of room for a ship this size, Jake replied. "The risk is acceptable if it gets us to the summit on time." Captain Vorthik studied the proposed route carefully. "Your path requires us to change course 17 times in 8 hours. Our engines will be working constantly." "Yes, but each course change follows the natural currents in the field. We will be working with the debris movement, not against it." Krista ran Jake's calculations through her own computer systems. "The mathematics are unusual, but they appear to be correct. This path could work." Commander Vesha slithered closer to examine the data. "Even if the path works, one mistake in timing could destroy us. Are you willing to stake your life on these calculations, human?" Jake looked up at the assembled aliens. "I am willing to stake all our lives on them. That is what the plan requires." Captain Vorthik was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the ship continued to shake as more debris struck the hull. Finally, he spoke. "We will try your path, human. But if we die, I will personally make sure you die first." Jake nodded. "Understood, Captain. Let's begin." The navigation through the debris field took exactly 8 hours and 12 minutes. Jake's calculations proved correct at every turn. guiding the stellar wanderer safely through spaces that seemed impossible to navigate. When the ship finally cleared the last of the floating wreckage and entered open space again, the entire bridge crew let out a collective sigh of relief. That Captain Vorthik looked at the main screen, showing clear space ahead, then turned to Jake. "Your path worked, human? We will reach Nexus Prime on schedule." Jake nodded, feeling exhausted but satisfied. "Thank you for trusting my calculations, Captain." "Do not mistake necessity for trust," Lieutenant Drex said harshly. "You got lucky. Nothing more." But Jake noticed that several other crew members were looking at him differently now. Krista, the Zephyrian navigator, had been watching his methods carefully during the entire journey through the field. A few of the engineers had asked quiet questions about his mathematical approach. Not everyone was ready to dismiss him as easily. As before, over the next 2 days, life aboard the ship settled into a routine. Jake spent most of his time in his small quarters, reading reports about the upcoming trade summit and preparing his presentation for the Galactic Council. Occasionally, crew members would stop him in the corridors to ask about human navigation techniques or mathematical methods, but most still treated him as a curiosity rather than an equal. On the 3rd day after the debris field, Jake made his way to the communal dining area for the evening meal. The dining hall was enormous, with tables designed for different species scattered throughout the space. Most aliens ate with their own kind, creating separate groups of Krillians, Vextai, Zephyrians, and others. Jake collected his meal from the food dispensers and looked around for an empty table. Most of the smaller tables were occupied, leaving only seats at tables where he would clearly not be welcome. He finally found a small table in a corner and sat down alone. The meal was nutritious but bland, designed to be safe for many different species rather than tasty for any particular one. Jake ate slowly, listening to the conversations around him. Most of the talk was about cargo manifests, trade routes, and port schedules. Normal ship business. He was halfway through his meal when Lieutenant Drex approached his table. The large Krillian was not alone. 3 other warriors from his unit followed behind him, all of them looking down at Jake with obvious hostility. "Well, look what we have here," Drex said loudly, making sure other diners could hear. "The tiny human who thinks he is smarter than the rest of us." Jake continued eating, not looking up. "Good evening, Lieutenant. How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining why Earth thinks it deserves a place in the Galactic Trade Council," Drex said, sitting down across from Jake without being invited. "Your species has barely left your home system. You have no significant resources, no advanced technology, and no military power. What exactly do you bring to the galaxy?" The dining hall had grown quieter as other aliens turned to watch the confrontation. Jake could feel dozens of eyes on him as he carefully set down his eating utensil. "Humans bring diversity of thought," Jake said calmly. "We offer different perspectives on common problems. As we demonstrated with the navigation crisis, sometimes a new approach can succeed where traditional methods fail." One of the other Krillian warriors laughed. "One lucky guess does not make your species valuable. Any child could have stumbled upon the same solution. Could they?" Jake asked, finally looking up to meet Drex's yellow eyes. "Your crew spent hours trying to solve that problem with their advanced computers and superior mathematics. If the solution was so obvious, why did none of them find it?" Drex's scaled face darkened with anger. "You dare suggest that humans are superior to Krillians?" "I suggest that different does not mean inferior," Jake replied. "Every species has strengths. Krillians are strong and brave warriors. Vextai are skilled engineers and traders. Zephyrians are brilliant mathematicians. Humans adapt quickly and think creatively. The galaxy benefits when all these strengths work together." "Pretty words," Drex said, standing up so that his full 9-foot height loomed over Jake. But words do not matter when enemies attack. What happens when pirates board this ship? Will you talk them to death with your human philosophy? Jake stood up as well, though the top of his head barely reached Drex's chest. I would do whatever was necessary to protect this ship and its crew. Whatever was necessary. Drex laughed again, and his companions joined in. Little human, you could not protect yourself from a sick child, much less real enemies. Your species is weak, and weakness has no place among the stars. The Krillian warrior stepped closer, using his size to intimidate Jake. Perhaps you should learn your proper place before we reach Nexus Prime. It would be embarrassing for everyone if Earth's representative forgot that humans are meant to serve, not lead. Jake felt his muscles tense, but he kept his voice level. I represent Earth with the full authority of my government and the Galactic Council. I do not serve anyone aboard this ship. Is that so? Drex reached out with one clawed hand and pushed Jake's shoulder hard enough to make him take a step backward. Then perhaps we should teach you some manners. The dining hall fell completely silent. Every alien in the room was watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. Jake knew he was in serious trouble. The 4 Krillian warriors could easily overpower him, and ship regulations probably allowed for discipline of passengers who caused problems. Just as Drex raised his hand to push Jake again, a deep rumbling sound filled the dining hall. The sound was low and menacing, like distant thunder mixed with the growl of some massive predator. Every alien in the room turned toward the source of the noise. From the shadows near the main entrance, a figure emerged that made even the large Krillians look small. Brutus Kane stood nearly 12 feet tall, with obsidian black scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His amber eyes glowed like molten gold, and when he opened his mouth slightly, rows of razor-sharp teeth were visible. Draconian moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Each step was perfectly controlled, silent despite his massive size. As he approached Jake's table, other diners quickly moved out of his way. Even Lieutenant Drex and his companions stepped back instinctively. Jake had heard about Brutus Kane, but had never seen him before. The ship's head of security rarely appeared in public areas, preferring to stay in the heavily armored security sections of the vessel. His reputation was legendary throughout the galaxy. Draconians were apex predators, evolved from creatures that had ruled the food chains of a dozen different worlds. They were perfect killing machines, and Brutus was considered one of the most dangerous of his species. The massive Draconian stopped a few feet from Jake's table and looked down at the scene before him. His glowing eyes moved from Drex to his companions, then finally settled on Jake himself. When Brutus spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily through the silent dining hall. What is happening here? Lieutenant Drex tried to stand straighter, though he was clearly uncomfortable under the apex predator's gaze. Just having a conversation with the human security chief, nothing that concerns you. Brutus tilted his massive head slightly, a gesture that somehow seemed more threatening than any show of aggression. Everything aboard this ship concerns me, Lieutenant, especially when it involves 4 warriors surrounding 1 passenger. The human was being disrespectful, one of Drex's companions said. We were simply explaining proper behavior to him. Brutus stepped closer to Jake, his nostrils flaring slightly as he scented the air around the human. Jake stood perfectly still, though every instinct told him to run from the massive predator studying him so intently. You, Brutus said, addressing Jake directly. What is your name? Jake Martinez, Security Chief. I represent Earth at the upcoming Trade Summit. Jake Martinez, Brutus repeated, as if testing how the name sounded. Tell me, Jake Martinez of Earth, what do you smell like? The question was so unexpected that Jake almost smiled despite the tense situation. I am not sure I understand, Security Chief. You carry scents that tell a story. Brutus explained, still studying Jake intently. Most beings smell of their daily activities, their food, their fear. But you smell of something else. Something familiar. Jake waited, not sure how to respond to such an unusual observation. You smell of metal and oil, of sleepless nights and hard decisions, of blood spilled in necessary causes. Brutus's amber eyes seemed to look directly into Jake's soul. You smell like a warrior, Jake Martinez. A warrior who has seen battle and survived. The dining hall remained silent as the apex predator continued his analysis. Tell me about your battles, small warrior. What enemies have you faced? What wars have you fought? Jake looked up at the massive draconian studying him so intently. The entire dining hall waited in silence for his answer. He could feel the weight of dozens of alien eyes watching this strange conversation between the ship's apex predator and the dismissed human diplomat. I served in Earth's military for 8 years, Jake said quietly. Urban warfare specialist. I fought in 3 major conflicts and led teams through some very difficult situations. Brutus nodded slowly, his amber eyes never leaving Jake's face. Urban warfare. Fighting in cities where civilians hide among enemies. Where every decision could mean life or death for innocent people. That requires a special kind of warrior. It requires someone willing to carry the weight of hard choices, Jake replied. Someone who can live with the consequences of their actions. And you have carried such weight? Brutus asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking of friends who had not come home, of split-second decisions that had saved some lives and cost others. Yes, I have carried that weight. Something changed in Brutus's expression. The predatory intensity remained, but there was also recognition, perhaps even respect. I know that weight, Jake Martinez of Earth. I have carried it across many worlds. Through many battles. Lieutenant Drex shifted uncomfortably. Security Chief, surely you are not comparing this tiny human to a true warrior like yourself. Brutus turned his massive head toward Drex, and the Krillian immediately took a step backward. I am comparing nothing, Lieutenant. I am recognizing what I see. This human has the scent of one who has faced death and survived. The scent of one who has led others through darkness and brought them safely home. Before anyone could respond, alarm sirens began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, and the voice of Captain Vorthik echoed through the communication system. All crew to battle stations. We have multiple ships approaching at high speed. They are not responding to communications. Repeat, all crew to battle. Stations. The dining hall erupted into motion as aliens from different species rushed toward their assigned positions. Brutus immediately activated a communication device on his wrist. Security to bridge. Report. Captain Vorthik's voice crackled. Through the device. 3 ships, draconian design, but flying pirate colors. Void Reapers by the look of their markings. They are armed and moving to intercept us. Brutus growled, a sound that made even the fleeing crew members move faster. Void Reapers leave no survivors. They will try to board us and kill everyone aboard. Jake felt his old military training kick in automatically. What are our defensive capabilities? Limited, Brutus replied, already moving toward the exit. This is a trade vessel, not a warship. We have shields and some weapons, but nothing. Designed for real combat. They reached the bridge together, Jake having to jog to keep up with Brutus's long strides. The command center was chaos, with crew members rushing between stations and shouting reports to Captain Vorthik. Status report, Brutus demanded as they entered. 3 heavy raiders, all armed with military-grade weapons, Commander Vesha reported. They have us surrounded and are demanding we surrender our cargo and passengers. Our shields are holding for now, added Krista from the navigation station, but they will not last long under sustained fire. Captain Vorthik stood at the center of the bridge, studying the tactical display. Our weapons are no match for theirs. If we fight, we will lose quickly. If we surrender, they will kill us anyway, Brutus said grimly. Void Reapers do not take prisoners. Jake stepped closer to the tactical display, studying the positions of the enemy ships. His military mind automatically began analyzing the situation, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. "Captain," he said, "may I suggest a strategy?" Several crew members turned to stare at him in disbelief. Lieutenant Drex, who had followed them to the bridge, laughed harshly. "Now the human thinks he is a military commander? Captain, we should focus on real solutions, not listen to fantasies from a species that has never fought a space battle." "Actually," Brutus said quietly, "I want to hear what he has to say." Captain Vorthik looked between the apex predator and the human, clearly torn. Another alarm sounded as enemy weapons fire struck their shields. "Speak quickly, human," Vorthik said. Jake pointed to the tactical display. "The pirates have us surrounded, but they are overconfident. They expect us to either surrender or fight conventionally. We can use their expectations against them." "How?" Commander Thesha asked. "Your ship is faster than theirs, but not by much. However, you have one advantage they do not expect. You have someone who has navigated complex debris fields." Jake looked at Krista. "Can your engines handle rapid course changes in sequence?" "Yes, but what good will that do against 3 warships?" Jake traced a pattern on the tactical display. "We make them chase us back toward the debris field we just left. Once we are close enough, we use the same navigation techniques that got us through safely before." "You want to lead them into the graveyard field?" Captain Vorthik asked. "That is suicide." "Not if we know how to navigate it, and they do not," Jake replied. "The pirates will follow us because they think they have us trapped. But once we are in the field, we can use the debris as cover and force them to fight on our terms." Brutus studied the tactical display carefully. "Explain more." "We lead them deep into the field, then use our superior navigation to separate their ships. Force them to fight us one at a time instead of all together. The debris will limit their mobility and weapons range." "And if your navigation fails?" Lieutenant Drex demanded. "If we get lost in the field? Then we die trying instead of dying. While surrendering," Jake said simply. "At least this way we have a chance." Another explosion rocked the ship as more enemy fire struck their weakening shields. Captain Vorthik looked at his officers, then at Brutus. "What do you think, Security Chief?" Brutus looked down at Jake. "Can you navigate that field again under combat conditions?" "I can try," Jake said, "but I will need help. And I will need the crew to trust my guidance, even when it seems impossible." "The humans' plan is insane," Commander Thesha said. "No one fights in a debris field." "Which is exactly why it might work," Brutus replied. "The pirates will not expect it." "Captain." Vorthik made his decision. "Do it. Set course for the graveyard field, maximum speed." The next hour was the most intense of Jake's life. The Stellar Wanderer raced through space with 3 pirate vessels in pursuit, their weapons constantly firing at the fleeing trade ship. Jake worked with Krista at the navigation station, calculating routes through the debris field while explosions shook the ship around them. "Entering the field now," Krista announced as the first pieces of ancient wreckage appeared on their screens. "Stay with the plan," Jake said calmly, though his heart was racing. "Lead them to coordinates 77 Alpha and execute the first turn sequence." The pirate ships followed them into the field, confident in their superior firepower. But as the debris grew thicker around them, their movements became more cautious. The lead pirate vessel had to slow down to avoid a massive piece of wreckage. "Now," Jake said, "execute turn sequence 1. Krista's hands flew over her controls, sending the Stellar Wanderer into a complex series of turns that took them behind. a cluster of old ship hulls. The pirates, trying to follow, found themselves separated as they navigated around different obstacles. "Target the lead ship," Brutus commanded. "All weapons fire." The Stellar Wanderer's limited weapons struck the isolated pirate vessel, damaging its engines and forcing it to fall behind. The second pirate ship tried to pursue, but Jake's navigation led them into a maze of spinning debris that forced the enemy to choose between following or avoiding destruction. "They are breaking off the attack," Commander Vesha reported with amazement. "The remaining ships are retreating from the field." Jake slumped in his chair, exhausted but triumphant. Around him, the bridge crew stared in disbelief at what they had just accomplished. Brutus placed one massive clawed hand on Jake's shoulder. "Well done, warrior." The hours after the battle were busy ones aboard the Stellar Wanderer. Engineering teams worked to repair damage from the pirate attack, while medical crews treated the wounded. Jake found himself helping wherever he could, carrying supplies and assisting with repairs, despite his small size. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the ship. Jake noticed that crew members who had ignored him before now nodded respectfully when he passed. Some even stopped to thank him for his role in saving the ship. The change in attitude was remarkable, but Jake tried to stay focused on the work that needed to be done. During the repairs, Jake worked alongside Lieutenant Drex to seal a hull breach in one of the cargo bays. The large Krillian warrior had said little since the battle, but Jake could tell something had changed in the way Drex looked at him. "I was wrong about you, human," Drex said quietly as they finished installing a temporary patch over the damaged hull. "I thought your species was weak because of your size. I did not understand that strength comes in many forms." Jake handed Drex another tool from their repair kit. "Everyone makes mistakes when they meet something new. The important thing is learning from those mistakes." "You saved my life during the battle," Drex continued. "When that pirate ship targeted the cargo bay, your navigation warning gave me time to reach safety. I will not forget this." "We all saved each other," Jake replied. "That is what crews do." Drex nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, crews. I think I understand now why Captain Vorthik and Security Chief Brutus listened to your suggestions. You think like a crew member, not like an outsider." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the ship's communication system. Captain Vorthik's voice echoed through the corridors. "All crew report to the main cargo bay in 1 hour. We will hold a ceremony to honor those who served with distinction during today's battle." Jake and Drex finished their repair work and made their way toward the cargo bay along with the rest of the crew. Jake wondered if he would be mentioned in the ceremony, though he hoped to avoid too much attention. He preferred to let his actions speak for themselves rather than seeking recognition. The main cargo bay was the same place where Jake had first been mocked just a week earlier. Now, nearly 300 crew members from dozens of different species filled the space. They stood in organized groups according to their departments, with senior officers at the front and support staff toward the back. Captain Vorthik stood on a raised platform where cargo containers had been moved aside. Behind him stood his senior staff, including Commander Vesha, Krista, and several department heads. To one side, Brutus Kine waited in his ceremonial security armor, the polished black plates making him look even more imposing than usual. "Today, our ship faced a serious threat," Captain Vorthik began, his voice carrying easily through the large space. "The Void Reapers who attacked us are among the most dangerous pirates in this sector. They have destroyed dozens of ships and killed thousands of innocent beings." The captain paused, looking out over his assembled crew. "But today they failed. Today they learned that the crew of the Stellar Wanderer cannot be easily defeated. We survived because we worked together, each member of our crew contributing their unique skills to our common defense. Applause filled the cargo bay as crew members showed their appreciation for their captain's words. Jake stood near the back with some of the junior engineering staff, trying to remain inconspicuous. Several crew members deserve special recognition for their actions during the battle, Captain Vorthik continued. Commander Vesha coordinated our defensive systems with exceptional skill. Navigator Krista executed complex maneuvers under extreme pressure. Chief Engineer Gorik kept our engines running despite significant damage. Each named crew member stepped forward to receive acknowledgement from their captain and their fellow crew members. Jake applauded along with everyone else, genuinely impressed by the professionalism and courage he had witnessed during the battle. But there is one crew member whose contribution was so significant that it deserves special attention, Captain Vorthik said. Someone whose unconventional thinking and tactical expertise saved all our lives. Jake felt a strange sensation in his stomach as the captain's eyes found him in the crowd. Jake Martinez of Earth, please come forward. The crowd parted as Jake made his way to the front of the cargo bay. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him, but the atmosphere was completely different from his first day aboard the ship. Instead of mockery and dismissal, he sensed respect and genuine appreciation. Jake climbed onto the platform and stood beside Captain Vorthik. From this elevated position, he could see the entire assembled crew. Krillians, Vextai, Zephyrians, Nagas, and members of a dozen other species all looked up at him with attention and respect. When Jake Martinez first came aboard our ship, Captain Vorthik said, many of us made judgments based on his size and his species' reputation. We saw weakness where we should have seen strength. We saw limitation where we should have seen potential. The captain turned to face Jake directly. During our passage through the graveyard field, Jake's mathematical expertise and unconventional thinking saved us days of travel time. During today's battle, his tactical knowledge and strategic planning saved our lives. I formally apologize to Jake Martinez for our initial treatment of him, and I acknowledge that humanity has earned its place among the galactic community. Applause erupted from the crowd, louder and longer than before. Jake felt his face grow, warm with embarrassment, but he also felt a deep satisfaction. Earth's reputation in the galaxy would be stronger because of what had happened aboard this ship. But Captain Vorthik was not finished. However, there is someone else who wishes to speak about Jake Martinez and his actions. The captain stepped aside as Brutus Kane moved to the center of the platform. A massive Draconian's presence immediately commanded absolute attention from every being in the cargo bay. When Brutus spoke, his deep voice carried clearly to every corner of the space. You laughed at this human when he first came aboard, Brutus began, his amber eyes scanning the crowd. You saw his small size and assumed he was weak. You heard about his species and decided they were inferior. You made these judgments without knowing anything about his character or his capabilities. Brutus placed one massive clawed hand on Jake's shoulder, the gesture clearly visible to the entire assembled crew. I have traveled this galaxy for many years. I have fought beside warriors from countless species. I have seen courage and cowardice, strength and weakness, honor and shame among beings of every size and shape. The security chief paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. What makes a true warrior is not size or strength, or the sharpness of claws and teeth. What makes a warrior is the willingness to stand when others fall, to lead when others follow, and to sacrifice personal safety for the good of others. Jake felt the weight of Brutus's hand on his shoulder, and the intensity of hundreds of eyes watching this unprecedented moment. Never before had anyone seen a draconian apex predator show such respect for a member of another species. During the battle, Jake Martinez led us into danger not for personal glory, but because it was our only chance for survival. He risked his own life to save ours, without hesitation and without asking for anything in return. These are the actions of a true warrior. Brutus turned to face Jake directly, his amber eyes meeting the human's steady gaze. I have fought alongside the greatest warriors this galaxy has produced. By the standards that truly matter, Jake Martinez is the equal of any of them. The cargo bay fell completely silent as the apex predator made his formal declaration. From this day forward, anyone who shows disrespect to Jake Martinez shows disrespect to me. Anyone who questions his courage questions mine. Anyone who threatens him threatens me. Brutus's voice grew deeper and more menacing. Jake Martinez is not just our ally. He is my brother in arms. The silence stretched for several heartbeats as the significance of these words sank in. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with a few individuals and quickly spread through the entire assembled crew until the cargo bay thundered with the sound of hundreds of beings showing their respect. Jake stood beside the massive draconian, overwhelmed by the moment. A week ago, these same beings had laughed at him and dismissed his species as unworthy. Now, the galaxy's most feared apex predator had declared him a brother. As the applause finally died down, Jake stepped forward to address the crew. Thank you all for this honor. I hope that what happened here will help the galaxy understand that strength comes in many forms, and that cooperation between different species makes all of us stronger. The ceremony concluded with Captain Dorthic announcing that they would reach Nexus Prime in 2 days. As the crew dispersed, many individuals approached Jake to offer personal thanks or to ask questions about human culture and capabilities. Later that evening, Jake stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars. Brutus joined him there, the two warriors standing together in comfortable silence. The galaxy will never underestimate humanity again, Brutus said quietly. Jake nodded, thinking about the long journey that had brought him to this moment. This is just the beginning. There is still much work to be done. Yes, Brutus agreed. But now we do that work together, as brothers.